So, a very good evening to all of you. And I know there are some big conferences going on parallelly tonight, and thank you all for having your time to join us. This Curious of India and the concept for this month, which we started just 2 days back, and as part of the introductory class, we had Professor Sushmita Ghoshal from PGIMER Chandigarh, and I think Madam has uh, set the standard and start the ball started rolling. In continuation of that, today we are having Professor Supriya Chopra from Tata Memorial Hospital, Mumbai. She is a professor in the department and she does not require any introduction from me. I am thankful that ma'am has agreed and she has agreed to take this class. So when I requested her and I was asking her about something from cervical cancer, and after her remarkable speech at Astro, I requested her to take something which can so that we can also get that opportunity to listen to her, and that can also include that part. So, ma'am has suggested this topic that we should discuss something on extending this therapeutic horizon in primary and recurrent CS cervix. Thank you so much, ma'am, for agreeing to take this class. And without wasting any more time, I am requesting ma'am to please take over the session and start your presentation.
Thanks, Dodul. I will just start the screen share and thank you to everyone for joining such late in the evening. Um, so I'm just 1 second. So I believe all of you can see the screen now.
Yes, ma'am.
So what I'm going to do in next, half an hour or so is the topic states stretching the therapeutic horizon. And I think cervix cancer can be treated by each and every one, but there are a lot of changes that are happening and have happened in the last 4 to 5 years. And it is good to discuss most of those changes because in my mind, I believe that we are very close to moving towards, upwards of 90 to 95% local control for cervix cancer. So I will take you through some of the details and some of the work that we are doing, but also go in addition to obviously the post-operative part. But I think more important than that is dealing with also recurrent cancers, post-surgical and post-radiation. So we'll talk about this entire spectrum. So I think before we start, it's very important to know what are the overall outcomes. And these are two landmark papers which have been published from Tata Memorial Center by Dr. Sudeep Gupta as the first author for NACT trial and Dr. Srivastava and Dr. Umesh for the stage 3B cracks trial. So I show these because, these are landmark figures also for understanding where we were 10 years ago, right? So for CA cervix 2B, if you see, we can look into a ballpark figure of 75% at 5 years. So this study included stage 1B to 2B. At that time, we never used to stratify according to nodal status. And as far as 3B is concerned, the 5 year OS was around 55%. So this is not a very good situation to be, especially when we see so many locally advanced cancers. And if you look into these conventional series, not only these, but also more recent like Retro Embrace, in where there were no dose prescription parameters, but just people doing ordinary image-based brachytherapy and few other series of conventional and image-based brachytherapy. So you can see that pelvic failure rate is in the tune of 11 to 49%. So that is quite high when you look at the upper limit, and distant failure is also equivalent. And what has changed in the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years is this change not only in pelvic failure rate, but as a result also in distant failure rate. And I don't have to show these slides. Many of you would have seen at many, many forums. But I think what has very beautifully come out of the image-based brachytherapy studies are two or three important things. And I think the most important thing for cervix cancer, which we primarily treat as radiation oncologists, is this increase in local control as a function of increasing dose. So you can clearly see that if we can move from 70 to 85 gray, there is a steep dose response relationship, but it doesn't stop here. It continues up to 95 gray. And you can see that these curves are not plateauing. Obviously, the event rate goes less, but still you don't see a clear plateau that is coming. And these are the corresponding gross tumor volume and intermediate risk CTV doses, but very, very clear that if you are able to make a jump for the target from 70 to 85 gray is the first biggest jump. But if you can go above 85 gray, that is going to be the second big jump when you can really become close to 95 to 100%. So here is where the cream lies, where you, if you can reach this particular aim, you can aim towards 100% local control. And needless to say, all of you must have seen these in many forums that this has become possible by a combination of intracavitary interstitial brachy. And I think what is most important is not only a single plane of needles, but now these multiple plane of needles which are available to us either with Vienna 2 or Venezia applicator, which has now become at least a routine in clinical practice at Tata Memorial Center. Per week, now 50% of our brachyes are advanced interstitial brachy. So I think there are a lot of learnings for this transition from Embrace group studies, in which we also participated, also in the first and now in second. So what has happened in this entire process is, if you look into the planning aims of Embrace 2, some of this information, even though the trial is not complete, are already incorporated in ICRU 89. But what we are aiming now is around 90 to 95 gray. So this is not a point A based prescription. This is purely in the setting of MR based brachytherapy. But you can see where we are going. The lowest limit of dose that is recommended is 85 gray. And if you can reach 95 gray, but at the same time to minimize morbidity, there is a 10 gray dose de-escalation to targets from the first Embrace study. So in the first Embrace study, the lower line are the dose targets, 90 for bladder, 75 for rectum. But now in the Embrace 2 study, we are aiming to get to 80 to 65 gray. And I will come to all these things in a bit of a time. So this is a typical patient which is now treated in the setting of advanced IMRT as well as image-guided brachytherapy. So this particular patient had multiple lymph nodes, and this is a patient who's typically treated within the advanced image-guided external radiation and brachy protocol. Patients will get adaptive IMRT, nodal SIDS, and when we treat these patients, we are very, very particular about our plans. We keep conformity index of 0.99 to 1.06. At present in Tata, we are close to 0.99, which means that you don't spill extra dose while giving IMRT because it is associated with a lot of long-term sequelae, which I'll come in a moment. And when you do things like this, so right now, this is the jump that we have made in our institution. In 2010, 2013, we were recruiting on the first Embrace study. We were at around D90 of 88. Now, presently, we are at around D90 of 96. Having said that, the range is from 86 to 114. If you have a very, very large tumor, you may not achieve 96. You may be at the lower end of it. But what is very remarkable is that this jump, which has taken almost a decade for us, the bladder, sigmoid, and rectum doses are actually going down lower. And this has become possible with application of certain concepts and using a higher component of intracavitary and interstitial in our clinical practice. And what is very remarkable is if you look into the acute morbidity of these patients, and I think that this is very important because traditionally, if you do semi-extended or extended field kind of radiation, the grade 3 morbidity reported in series is around 40 to 45%. But with these highly conformal plans, what we have become is this one line in pink that you see the grade 3 toxicity, but a vast majority of our patients are just having grade 1 to grade 2 toxicity in these particular studies and also now in our routine practice, because we made a transition towards at least Embrace kind of protocol for our routine patients, the overall treatment time, which used to be around 65 to 70 days when we were doing 4 fractions per patient in a very busy clinic and shifting to single application multiple fractions, our overall treatment time not only in clinical trials but in routine practice has come down to 50 days, which I think will also contribute to local control. In our institution, in the last 2 years, some of you may have seen this publication, but those of you who have not seen, we also recently investigated the impact of nodal status because FIGO staging changed. And till date, whatever is being done is in the terms of FIGO 2009, and nodal status is not taken into consideration. For those of you who are interested, this is now available as full text in Red Journal. So for around 700 patients from Tata, we categorized according to lymph node status. And what we observed is that there is a clear impact of lymph node volume and number on outcomes of the patients. This is a fact that was known since ages but never proven. So we kind of validated the FIGO 2018 staging, but found out that there are still certain things in FIGO 2018 which are not clear, and there is more work that is needed to define response in terms of lymph node volume and para-aortic nodes. And as you know, now more and more literature is available that with improving local control, the predominant pattern of failure is becoming lymph nodal. So if you look either from Embrace One study or other studies, so these pictures look very colorful, but I think in summary, what it means is that these are different stations of lymph nodes, PAO, common iliac, external iliac, parametrial. So you can see that para-aortic nodes are becoming actually one of the chief patterns of failure, and still followed by pelvic lymph nodal disease. And these are traditionally the patients, once who relapse in node, the median survival is just 12 months. So there can be only two strategies to improve these nodal control. One is to prophylactically treat them, which still is not the standard of care, or possibly treat them at relapse, and I'll come to that in some time. So you can very clearly see, so these are the results from Embrace studies, and these are the results from Tata, where not all patients are in the setting of image-based brachy, many are in the setting of point A-based brachy. But because we dose escalated, we also see that for us also quite a bit of relapse is regional, and you can see where the nodes relapse. So there is a clear case for improving nodal control, and that can happen only through integration of nodal dose escalation. Traditionally, we have never done nodal dose escalation, but in 2017, we systematically started nodal dose escalation for all our patients. And this is what we do now for all our patients. And you can see that we employ simultaneous integrated boost, but keep our plan so tight because one of the major concerns with nodal SIB is escalation of GI toxicity. But you can see that most of our plans, so this is a planning conformity index of 1.1 with IMRT. So with nodal SIB, since 2017 to 2020, our conformity while giving SIB has remarkably improved. That means that we are using higher doses, but we are not spilling higher doses to normal tissue structures in our institution. So for a busy center like Tata and many other centers which see a lot of cervix cancer patients, if you have to make a transition to IMRT and image guided brachy patients, like for example, at any given time we have 70 to 90 patients in treatment, it produces a huge burden on the system for target delineation, planning, having everything ready. So what we did in our center very recently is that, we timed all the processes and we realized that actually delivering curative radiotherapy for cervix cancer, the time taken is much, much more than a Bardines hysterectomy. And there's a lot of physician time that goes in contouring. There's a lot of physics time that goes in planning, then doing adaptive setups, image guided brachytherapy. So we decided to bring a bit of automation into our system. And what we did was we started delineating in a very systematic way to develop machine learning approaches so that automation can build in the technical and skill gap, because they are all kind of physicists, all kind of students, all kind of physicians, but there is a huge investment in time which happens. So we trained the Eclipse planning system to automate the entire planning. And where we are now is this is a comparison of a clinical plan versus a knowledge-based plan. This is a machine-led plan. So a clinical planning process for a physicist takes around 120 minutes. And now that we have trained Eclipse, it takes around 15 minutes to generate these highly complex knowledge-based plans. And here you can see a very good comparison, and a lack of difference is a very good thing to have, which means machines can generate as good as plan IMRT as the physicist could do. And currently this work is under consideration for publication. So what we are doing in our also institution is moving towards scripting based evaluation. This is not only applicable to gynecological cancer, but this kind of, when you move to advanced treatments, bringing in process efficiency and bringing in reproducibility becomes very important. So this is now how we evaluate all our plans and make sure that once the target delineation is done, IMRT plans are ready the same day and finalized the same day using a very objective system. So with all these kind of complex techniques, I think now the biggest challenge is becoming distant relapses. So pelvic nodal is controlled by giving simultaneous integrated boost, and there is some dose response that we are already seeing. So the next important challenge is how to reduce distant recurrences for cervix cancer. So unlike lung cancer, unlike many other type of cancers, the molecular based risk therapeutics are not as advanced in cervix cancer. So in Tata Memorial Center, we did a study looking into, some kind of molecular markers that form the basis of radiation resistance. And this is the study that we published recently in Red Journal, I think 2 years ago, where we treated a uniform cohort of locally advanced cervix cancer. And all patients underwent SOX2, OCT4, NANOC. These are stem cell markers evaluation. And what we saw in our patient cohort is that there is a clear impact of biology in producing local relapses in patients after chemoradiation. And we also saw this in some of the other genomics work that we are doing in our institution for adenocarcinoma. So the first slide is showing excessive expression of stem cell. But when we did some genomics work, we realized that PIK3CA pathway is one of the upregulated pathways in cervix cancer. So right now, this pathway is also corroborated by the TCGA, which is the Cancer Genome Atlas for cervix cancer. And you can see that PIK3 AKT pathway is one of the expressed pathways for cervix cancer. So we started a phase 3 randomized trial in 2015-16 of testing AKT pathway inhibitor in addition to concurrent chemoradiation and brachytherapy. So we started this in 2018. And as you can see in this picture here, nelfinavir, which is AKT pathway inhibitor, has an action mechanism of action which is independent to cisplatin. So if, for example, patient has resistance to cisplatin, it could still be sensitive to nelfinavir. Also, this drug has some effect on PD-L1 expression. So what typically happens in this trial is that patients with, sorry, this is not stage 3B now anymore, it's stage 3, including node positive patients. Patients get randomized to control arm and experimental arm. They start on nelfinavir day -7. So for those of you who are not aware, nelfinavir is an anti-HIV drug, also known to work on AKT pathway. And this is the drug 2 or 3 years ago, which showed tremendous benefit in lung cancer patients. And at least there are 10 different trials going on with nelfinavir. So we combine nelfinavir with chemoradiotherapy. Patients go for image-based brachy. So this is how a typical patient would flow, that you have PET and MR at baseline. You take biopsies, look at AKT expression, then give the standard chemoradiation and image-based brachy to the patient, and then do pharmacokinetic studies and additional translational studies. So this is where we are at present with the study. 34 patients have been randomized. We have not observed any dose limiting toxicity or drug related adverse events. And in parallel, we are doing a lot of translational research work just to understand the response in reference to AKT, but also CD4, CD8, because these are tumor immune infiltrates. We also have PDL1 work going on, but that is not ready for sharing today. So what we expect is that the study would complete accrual somewhere around 2024, 2025, and we'll have some analysis of impact of this AKT pathway inhibitor. So these are all host of other trials which are going on now with radiotherapy and immune therapy in locally advanced cervix cancer. And I think that if any of these trials turn out to be positive, it will change the therapeutic scene for cervix cancer. But what is very important is that cervix cancer also holds the distinction of not even a single positive trial for chemotherapy in last 20 years, be it neoadjuvant or adjuvant chemotherapy. So what we are also doing very actively as part of international collaboration is to look into biomarkers for cervix cancer. And I'm very proud to share that actually this BioEmbrace is jointly hosted and led by Tata Memorial Center. So what we are doing is accumulating all the specimens of patients recruited in the Embrace group of studies. So the analysis for Europe is happening in Netherlands, and for many of centers in India who participated in Tata Memorial Center. And we are looking into L1-CAM expression. This is also a molecular marker which is associated with epithelial mesenchymal translational pathway. And what we have seen in early analysis is that there may be impact of T cell panel and also impact of some of the other immune markers. But this is early work, and hopefully by 2021, we'll have some results about these studies. So this is much about what's going in locally advanced cervix cancer. I will shift gears to postoperative RT, and I think we can take questions in the end. So with postoperative RT, I think POTIC studies have set the benchmark, though they come from endometrial cancer. But what is very clear on EBRT versus brachy studies is a consistent impact on quality of life, especially GI, with the use of external radiation. And there is a very long-term data which is available with POTIC studies at 10 and 13 years of follow-up. And more recently, also from TIME-C study, so from NRG. So this study from NRG tried to investigate if use of IMRT reduces bowel toxicity, acute. And what is very interestingly seen is that the difference is only in week 5. And as you follow patients till 3 years, the benefit of IMRT disappears. So the trial from Tata Memorial Center, which I recently presented last month at Astro, became very important because there was total lack of clarity for benefit of IMRT. In this study, we randomized patients to 3D CRT and IMRT and very systematically captured CTCAE and quality of life for a long time, almost from 48 to 72 months. And this is just a schema of how patients were treated. Standard arm was 3D CRT and IMRT arm was on tomotherapy. And I'm also very happy to tell that this actually was the first technical multi-center trial because Tapas, who was initially now a consultant in Sangrur, was initially a fellow on this trial. He started parallel recruitment in Sangrur. So it was actually done as a 2-institution trial. And these are the final results from the PARSER study. And we did not study toxicity as percentages, but we studied the toxicity-free survival as one would do for disease-free survival. So here you see in red the IMRT arm and blue the 3D CRT arm. And you can clearly see that the grade 2 toxicity-free survival is much better in IMRT arm. But if you look into grade 3 toxicity, there are hardly any toxicities with the IMRT arm. And again, these are the cumulative event regression. So very clearly, irrespective of disease relapse, irrespective of what toxicity you measure, IMRT has clear superiority for postoperative RT. And if you look into patient-reported outcomes, which is the quality of life, again, you can see at 48 months, these linear lines represent quality of life scores. And there is a benefit that even patients are consistently reporting in terms of their symptoms. And if we further see, these are slightly complex graphs to understand, but any one of you who has done some quality of life work would know that, only this dark yellow or gray represents patients who have substantial symptom burden. And you can see that at 36 months, most of the patients do not report any long-term sequelae of radiation. I will now shift gears and come to post-surgical recurrent cancers and share some of our work. So in India, hysterectomy is very common, and many times we see that patients come with some kind of cancer at the vaginal apex where the primary has not been removed properly. So if you look into world over series, the 3-year DFS ranges from 47% to around 65%. So best of the outcomes are actually reported from our center in Dana-Farber in US, where you can see 3-year DFS around 75%, 80 and 75%. So what we started in our institution in 2011 was to see if integration of advanced imaging helps us to do better brachytherapy. So at baseline, we did T2 weighted imaging, diffusion weighted imaging, thymidine PET, Myso PET, and gave them IMRT, and then tried to plan brachy on the basis of these imaging findings. And you can see these are the baseline PET, FLT, and Myso. And then we implanted also on the basis of these patterns. And what you can very beautifully see is that in these recurrent cancers in the first panel, so our 3-year local control is 91%. So in recurrent cancer, this is totally unheard of if you look into world literature. And what was also very important is that if these are relatively small volume recurrences, we were at 94% local control and 91% survival for patients who have had post-surgical recurrence. So normally in World Series, these patients have outcome of 50 to 65%. But what we observed is that patients who have larger tumors or F-myso positive tumors, their outcomes are not so great. So our next focus is going to be to improve outcomes of these patients who are represented in the blue line. So this was the multivariate analysis, as I've said, PET volume, F-myso uptake. So our next focus will be to improve outcomes of these patients. And in these recurrent cancers, it was also very satisfying for us to show that these patients have a consistently maintained quality of life without any adverse effect. So I think this is the biggest success when patients are reporting that their quality of life is great. It is of huge satisfaction. So I will now take next 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes to talk about another indication for cervix cancer, which has become very relevant since we have had all these trials in oligometastatic setting. But unfortunately, not even a single trial or study, which is PALAMA study or SABR Comet, did not have any patients with cervix cancer. But if you look into this SEER database analysis, which became available in 2018, it very clearly demonstrated that if patients with metastatic cervix cancer also have pelvic radiation and brachytherapy, there is almost a doubling of survival. But what was not clear from this database were who are these patients, whether they have polymetastasis, single metastasis, what kind of treatment you do. So that was not very clear, but it clearly became a reason for hope because best of the chemotherapy just gives an year of survival. I can tell you from the EMBRACE study groups in the first study, all patients who have had relapse have died within 12 months. So this data is very important, but this is not for recurrent patients. These are for de novo metastatic patients. And if you look into isolated series, which have no more than 30 to 40 patients in most of the series, if people have treated oligometastatic disease more radically, much like other sites, there is hope for excellent control in these patients. But unfortunately, the data in GYN cancers is very limited. So we ended up doing a survey which has just got published in Green Journal. It will come in January issue. So we tried to capture the world over practice within EMBRACE research network of 40 countries of what do people do when patients relapse. So we realized that clearly most of the clinicians are giving some form of radiation, but mostly palliative. So there is intention to give more radical doses with evolving evidence, but most of them are not in that range. So in Tata, since last 4 or 5 years, we had always done salvage brachytherapy, but we also became more aggressive with retreatments. So I can give you some example. This is a patient who had had EBRT, advanced image guided brachy, but still an infield recurrence within 6 months. This is another patient who had been treated in 2013 for CA cervix and in 2020 presented with periurethral relapse. Then there is another patient who presented with lateral relapse, nodal relapse, and then this is a case example of second primary. So normally re-radiation, people who have some skill would do it, others will give PAL chemo for these patients, not only in India but world over. So what we started doing is to approach these relapses more aggressively. So here you see example of a patient where we treated in 2018 for a stage 3C2 cervix cancer, extended field radiation. Patient came with a pelvic nodal relapse in 2019. We again re-radiated with stereotaxy. Then patient came in 2020 August and again with infield nodal relapse. As you can see with this red volume, we again re-radiated. And now since re-radiation, this patient is almost at 8 or 9 months. So for this node, we are at a cumulative dose of around 140 gray, still with no morbidity, because we have learned to keep our volumes very, very small and our image guidance and matching of a very high quality. So this is example of another patient who had first course RT for CA cervix in 2010. She came with second primary CA vulva in 2018 or 19. And of course, surgery was not possible because she had absolutely stenosed vagina, no clear margins that could be achieved. So we re-irradiated her with IMRT, but then there's a question of boost because patient has not been operated. So we went here and did this brachytherapy. It's a free hand. You can see how we've put catheters along the clitoris, along the periurethral catheter, making a loop much like head neck cancer. And this patient is now at 1 year, absolutely no sequelae of re-irradiation, and we continue to follow her up. These are some other examples where we use advanced radiation. So this is an example of a lady who had post-surgical recurrence in 2018. We did EBRT and MUPPET in 2018. And then after 2 years, you can see in PET here, she presented with lateral relapse. So there were also vaginal disease when I did examination under anesthesia. So we gave 30 to 36 gray with EBRT. And then I did Venezia applicator for her with zero tandem and interstitial brachy. She also had a nodal relapse at the same time, which again we treated with IMRT. So this patient is also at 8 or 9 month follow-up, as of now fine, and I expect her to go on for a few more months. Please remember that palliative chemo will give survival no more than 9 to 12 months. This is again an example of a patient which I said treated in 2013, and then she presents with periurethral relapse. So these are very difficult to operate and even irradiate site. So we gave her some dose of EBRT. You can see this huge periurethral relapse where my mouse cursor is going on. So we gave her around 30 gray of EBRT, and then I did interstitial brachy for her. And this patient also continues to be absolutely fine without any late sequelae. So these are our results for patients who have relapsed. We have till now treated 40 patients with the relapse, and their median time to first relapse is 14 months. So basically first treatment and relapse, the difference is 14 months. And we have done re-RT or RT to a dose of 30 to 42 gray in 5 to 6 fractions. And these are the survival estimates. So right now, the median OS from relapse is 17 months. This is much better than any chemotherapy on this planet, whether it is pembrolizumab, bevacizumab, or any kind of therapy. And what is very important is that 50% of these patients did not receive any chemo. Why? Because they had poor performance status or medical oncologist refused. And grade 3 toxicity in our cohort is around 12%. And as of now, only 37% patients have had event. And I'm sure what is now 17 months now will go up to around 24 to 25 months. So to summarize, there are a lot of trials now which are going in re-RT setting, also with immunotherapy and stereotaxy for cervix cancer. So I think within 3 or 4 years, the field is going to undergo a bit of change, and all of us have to be technically and clinically empowered for it. So to summarize, I would say that advances in technology, imaging, and technique have improved possibilities of treatment and retreatment, and there is 90% local control in our series in upfront setting with 18 to 20% distant metastasis rate. Our long-term morbidity is substantially reducing, and intensive retreatment is becoming the new norm, and future trials with drug combinations will define the further course. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful lecture and leading us to newer options of treatment in cervical cancer, and so many of very impressive and interesting researches going on.
I'm sorry?
Ma'am, would you like to take a few questions? I know you have a next couple of minutes.
Yeah, sure.
The first question is your views on prophylactic para-aortic radiation and SIP versus sequential nodal boost.
Okay, so I will address both these questions differently. So the biggest question is, so right now, PET scan is the best investigation for nodal disease, but PET misses disease in 8 to 9% of patients. So the question of prophylactic RT comes because there is some microscopic disease which we are unable to detect, and we will like to get better with our local control. So there are two clinical series. One comes from Sushil Beriwal's group, where they have done prophylactic nodal RT. So they hardly have any relapses in prophylactic nodal series. But these are for patients who are pelvic node positive. This strategy at present is also being tested in Embrace 2 study, that if patient has a single common iliac node or more than 3 nodes in the pelvis, so you go up to renal hilum. So as of today, we don't know, but the expectation is that this strategy will lead to improvement in nodal control in another 8% of patients. But whether that will translate into benefit in survival is not known. In the sense, these node positive patients may not necessarily have the first relapse in para-aortic node, but they may have a distant metastasis. So what we do in Tata for our clinical practices, we do not do any prophylactic nodal irradiation, because we also know from RTOG trial that concurrent chemotherapy takes care of the micrometastasis. But having said that, there are some situations where you have pelvic nodes and very faint para-aortic nodes, which nuclear medicine will call negative. So in such cases, on case-to-case basis, we do include those nodes, but it is a decision which is taken more as an informed decision. So to cut the long story short, we do not practice prophylactic RT. There are current trials which are going on, and our practice may also change in next 2 or 3 years depending on what comes out of those trials.
The next question is, for stage 4A, chances of fistula with direct CTRT. Is it better to take NACT
Okay.
first followed by CTRT?
Okay, so there are 2 or 3 things with this. So patients who have, we try to objectively define what is 4A. So if you look into the results of our neoadjuvant chemo trial, patients who received neoadjuvant chemo before CTRT had worse survival. All of us believe that giving neoadjuvant chemo will shrink the disease, but we must keep in mind that it increases overall treatment time, and the damage that it does to the patient is quite substantial. But sometimes these 4A patients are at real risk of fistula. For example, if you have 2 by 2 centimeter infiltration or something, then we do in select cases give neoadjuvant chemo, but only for 1 or 2 cycles. We don't go for 4 cycles because we don't want to get into the zone of accelerated repopulation. And we repeat cystoscopy after 2 cycles of chemo. And if it is clean, we go ahead with CTRT. Patients who have infiltration beyond this are candidates for palliation. And I think I see a lot of people just going to give systemic chemo. Please understand that when aim is palliation, chemo will just give more symptoms to the patient. Then in that case, you should be brave enough and give patient palliative RT. But I think if you want to overstretch, then up to 3 by 3 centimeter bladder infiltration is something that you can stretch and give neoadjuvant chemo. But beyond that, I think we have to just call it a day and uh, give palliative RT or hypofractionated RT.
Ma'am, what can be done with radiation in centers other than Tata in recurrence?
So you learn brachytherapy. So just 1 second. I think someone is locking my door. Just give me a minute.
Okay, sure.
I'll come back. Just give me 1 second. I'm in my office.
Right.
Okay. So your question is that for recurrent cancers, right? Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So you're talking of post-surgical or post-radiation recurrences?
Ma'am, the doctor asking this question has not specified this, but I believe it's post-radiation.
Okay. So see, post-radiation recurrences, if it is amenable for brachytherapy, I would say do brachytherapy if surgery is not envisioned. So the idea is to learn brachy. All of you do stereotaxy left, right, and center. So it just requires 4 or 5 months of training. And I can tell you now there are a lot of residents in the country who have learned brachy and they do brachy. So this is, and it is not rocket science. It is just skill development. So what will you do if you are a surgeon? You will learn how to operate. So if you want to do advanced gynec brachy, so it's the same difference that a surgeon can do exenteration versus not, right? So I would encourage all of you to do a brachytherapy fellowship and learn brachytherapy, right? It's not about Tata. Needles you get everywhere and anywhere, right? And the equipment, there is a case to, you will give patient immune therapy which is going to cost so much and lead to nothing, right? So my answer is learn brachytherapy. I have no other answer. And as far as nodal relapses are concerned, so for nodal relapses, we try and use more of IMRT or stereotactic approach. So one has to go case to case basis. If you're not in Tata, and if there is a patient, you can definitely refer to a center of excellence. And I can tell you that there are at least 7 to 8 people in the country who would do advanced brachytherapy, right? But
Very
I
true,
would
ma'am.
encourage everyone to learn.
I think, ma'am, that should be the answer, that the brachytherapy has to be learned by people who know it and should move forward. Ma'am, the first
Yeah,
question
I
had a
think all
second
of
component.
people who ask this question don't want to learn brachy.
I agree with him. I think that's a very lame excuse that brachy cannot be done. It really does not require huge setup. It just needs some kind of motivation and some learning. There will be a learning curve truly, but after that, it will be really a nice experience for the center. Ma'am, the first question had a second component regarding SIP versus sequential boost.
Yes, so I will like to answer this question because I'm a huge fan of SIB, but I know that a lot of people don't like SIB. So the advantages of SIB are, first of all, you increase dose per fraction, you reduce overall treatment time. But people who don't do SIB are the people who feel that nodes at baseline are too large and it will lead to excessive toxicity. I can tell you, and very soon by next year, I'm going to publish our data. In my entire SIB cohort, I do not remember a single patient having sigmoid or bowel toxicity because there is a way to do SIB. So the way to do SIB is that you don't boost PTV or you don't boost CTV, you boost GTV. So when I use 57 in 25 or 55 in 25 for SIB, so I boost the gross tumor to that dose. PTV gets 50 in 25 because that is a geometrical margin. It should not get high dose. But I also do SIB in the setting of interstitial brachy where it becomes risky. So for that, I would refer you to the planning aims of Embrace 2 protocol. So in a very beautiful way, how to do that kind of SIB. So basically what happens is when you're doing nodal SIB, the organ at risk which is closest is generally bowel or sigmoid. So bowel mostly doesn't get any radiation from brachytherapy, but sigmoid can. So sigmoid can be in the firing range of SIB as well as brachy. So what we do is when we are initially planning IMRT, we generate something called as HELP contour. So we delineate HRCTV at baseline, which is basically the gross disease seen on MR plus gray zones, and give it a 1 centimeter margin. And we ensure that any of the SIB hotspots do not come in that region because HRCTV plus 1 centimeter from baseline is the area which will receive interstitial brachy later on. So we try to prevent overlap between those volumes upfront because of this entire SIB exercise, the only organ you will damage really is sigmoid. So one has to be careful. As far as SEB is concerned, I don't believe in SEB because, but obviously there is a case for people who believe. So we did a dosimetric planning study in Tata of SIB versus SEB. So the dose was much higher during SEB because you are not controlling dose at the same time. And these are best of the physicists who are doing it as a task. And organ at risk dose was much higher in SEB. Second thing is sometimes you are tempted not to give dose if patient has a complete nodal response at the end of EBRT. In that case, unknowingly you reduce the dose of nodes to 45 to 50 gray. So as of now, we don't know nodal dose response relationship, but I can tell you in the last 3 years, I would have treated around 120 patients with SIB. They must have had around 300 nodes. And on top of the head, I can tell you that there are just 6 or 7 patients with nodal relapse. But this is no statistics because you're asking for comparison between SIB and SEB. So we are working on that. And I think by end of 2021, there will be some paper from our group.
Thank you, ma'am. One more question, I think, and then we should wind it up. What should be the imaging of choice to evaluate after SIB?
So all node positive patients in our institution have a follow-up CT till the node resolves. Main reason for that is, so first follow-up will be around 3 to 4 months and then another 4 months. So nodes regress slowly as compared to primary. And a patient who's pelvic node positive can also have a para-aortic relapse later on. So imaging is required not only to see the regression of the node, but also to see if patient has come up with a para-aortic nodal disease or a distant metastasis. What is also important is that nodes which do not completely regress at 8 or 9 months, we tend to do fine needle aspiration cytology. And if they are either stable or increasing in size and still positive at 8 or 9 months, we go and retreat them, because anything that is positive at 8 or 9 months has microscopic disease, which will tomorrow throw a distant metastasis. So 8 or 9. So for primary tumor, we wait for 5 to 6 months. For node, 8 to 9 months. So I think imaging is very critical for a node positive patients. And I always tell my residents, in our country, we do so much of imaging for, GBM. All of them are going to die within a year. For pancreas cancer, liver cancer, all of them will die within a year. But these women who are going to live, we are so miser for imaging. So these are the patients, we must image them. At least it's not in guidelines, but it will come in guidelines. Node positive patients definitely need to be imaged till you have resolution. Like not every month, but once in 4 months at least.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, it's 8:57 now. So there are, I think,
I'm okay if there are other questions for.
2 more questions.
I can take for another 10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. So we can take 2 more questions. There are 2 more questions. So what should be the ideal time gap between first radiation and the recurrence to be treated with re-irradiation?
So, something, ideally it should be 16 to 18 months, right? But what happens is that it's all a function. So for example, if a patient has residual central disease at 6 months and surgeon refuses to operate, right? So what do? You can't leave the patient. So many times in such scenario, we believe that this is a radio resistant patient, and we start with systemic chemotherapy for 3 to 4 cycles. And if patient has good response, we go ahead and do brachytherapy, clearly knowing that it is not an ideal window. Ideal is 18 months or so. So that is the time one should wait. But most often these patients have no other therapeutic option, because sorry to say, in our country, primary surgery is only not good. There are very few people who can do a good salvage surgery. So salvage surgery means salvage hysterectomy in an irradiated pelvis or exenteration. So very few surgeons can do it. So if patient doesn't have metastasis, I don't mind going again as early as 8 months. I know it's not ideal, but if patient doesn't have distant metastasis, so 8 or 9 months will be a time period when I would consider re-irradiation if there is no other therapeutic option. But how do we do that? We give them a trial of systemic chemo. Anybody who has to develop further metastasis will metastasize. You test the biology and then go ahead.
There is one clinical scenario, ma'am. The patient with carcinoma vault with multiple pelvic and para-aortic lymph nodes. The lymph nodal mass is 6 cross 4 cross 10 centimeter. The CT thorax, there are prevascular nodes which are suggestive of infective etiology, no lung mets. So what can be done for this patient? Good performance status, 49-year-old.
I will first of all definitely biopsy this patient, because in CT thorax it's written that it is infective etiology. This large size of node without symptoms is rare for cervix cancer. So we have had situations where we have also treated patients with, CLL or any other condition or sarcoidosis, right? So definitely I would consider doing biopsy. And if biopsy comes out to be positive, now clearly you cannot get complete response for a 10 centimeter node. First of all, I don't remember seeing a 10 centimeter node for CA cervix ever, right? So it has to be something different. And if it turns out to be CA cervix, I will definitely give systemic chemo first. And then after that, based on response, it will be extended field radiation, nodal SIP, and interstitial brachy, if indicated, or at least a central vaginal brachy. But this seems very unusual for CA cervix. I've never seen 10 centimeter nodal mass for CA cervix.
Very true, ma'am. So I think that's the end of the questions, and there are a lot of messages appreciating and greeting you, ma'am.
Thank you very much for your patience to listen almost at end of the day. So I'm really appreciative of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Actually, ma'am, all these classes actually happen after 8. So it's like a routine for us now.
But too tiring for us.
That is true, ma'am. Sitting at TMH and being involved in so many clinical trials, publishing papers, and then taking class at the end of the days should be tiring. Thank you so much, ma'am, for
But it's a
spending this
pleasure.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Good night,
Thank you.
ma'am. Good night, ma'am, and good night, everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Bye. Bye.
Bye.